Hello, I'm Yoram Hazony, and this is NatConTalk, where nationalism and conservatism meet. Today we will be speaking to Dave Rubin of the Rubin Report, the undisputed king of talk video, and the author of the national bestseller, Don't Burn This Book. Dave Rubin, welcome to NatConTalk.
Yoram, it's good to be with you. I'm very impressed with your lighting and your background and the blur effect. You've become a professional overnight, my friend.
Well, it's not overnight. We spent the last 3 months, the crew, imitating everything that you guys do. And getting a compliment from you, that's like, that's it. We've made it.
Well, listen, you guys didn't cheap out, because if I've learned one technical thing about cameras, it's that it takes a certain camera to blur the background without blurring the person. So you're on your way to becoming
You have no idea. The crew here, they're like sitting and smiling. You just made their week. Anyway, listen, nice. You're the first guest on the first episode of this new show, and I'm excited. I'm grateful to you for coming in, giving us the time.
Yeah, well, first off, it's my pleasure, and congratulations on the new show and the studio and everything else. But as long as we're passing out compliments, we'll do it up top, and then we'll stop doing it, and then we'll get into some substantive stuff, I'm sure. But you're one of the people over the last couple years that I think has really provided a framework to look at the world that is clear and that is sensible and that is actually offering a defense of so much of what our friend Ben Shapiro would call the disintegration of Western values. We're all sort of in this wrestling match, this boxing match, whatever you want to call it right now. And I think most people aren't providing a sort of comprehensive set of views that really can stand up against the forces of leftism and Marxism and social justice, all of those things. And I think you're one of the guys that's doing a nice job with that. And that's why I quote you often in my show, and I referenced you in my book, because we need more voices that look at the world in a complete way, as opposed to just responding to every little daily political event or daily current event, because then you're just in an endless rat race. And I'm really trying to avoid that. I'm trying, and that's why I do my August off the grid, where I do no news and no current events or anything, because I find if you just respond to everything every day, well, then we're all sort of pulled to hell together. Where if you can actually have a comprehensive view of the world, it makes you feel a little less crazy as the news gets crazier.
Well, look, we are definitely in a tight spot, and like you, I'm doing everything that I can. I want to get into all these really big, serious issues, and American cities are burning and the forests are burning. But before we get into that, I do have, believe it or not, I have some viewers who are older. And so it's not like, like all the young people, everybody in their 20s and 30s and 40s, everybody on earth knows who you are. But I've discovered that some of the older people I talk to don't yet fully know who you are. And so I wanted to start just with, how I connected with you. I mean, I'm one of those older people at this point. And it was just 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago, I had a book out. And I was talking to my kids, to my teenage kids, and telling them I wanted to get my ideas out. And they said, well, look, if you want to reach young people, then you've got to be on Dave Rubin. And, like the old fogey that I've become, I said, who is Dave Rubin? And my son said, no, Dad, you have no idea how totally out of touch you are with reality right now. and he sent me to look at videos. And I literally spent 2 days watching your show, and then from there watching Sam Harris and Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson. And I came back to my sons, and I said, I am in complete shock. I mean, I can't believe what I've been watching. Here I thought that all media are becoming shallower and shallower. And here I discovered that there's this vast audience that's watching 1 hour long programs, sometimes 2 hour long programs that are dealing with politics and philosophy and religion and psychology, like all the most important things in the world. And hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of young people are sitting and watching this. I said, this is absolutely incredible. And the truth is that it actually gave me some hope some hope for the possibility that people still want to have civil, serious discussions going into the next generation instead of just hysteria. So I guess I thought that we'd open with your saying, just maybe saying a few words about how you became Dave Rubin. I mean, you're basically the king of talk video. You're the architect more than anyone else of this space, this safe space for civil conversation. How did you get there? How did you get into this?
Well, I'll start right at the beginning. I was born on June 26, 1976, and I think you'll appreciate this reference. That means my bris was 8 days later on July 4th, 1976, on the 200th, the bicentennial of the United States. So maybe somehow some of this stuff about freedom and everything else was built into me right from the beginning. But I come from what I think is a very sort of typical Jewish American family. I was born in Brooklyn. I grew up in Long Island. My parents still live in the same house that I grew up in now 45 plus years later. I have a brother and a sister. We were sort of middle to maybe upper middle class. Although in the town we grew up in, there were some families that were really super wealthy. So I always thought we were kind of poor, but we did okay. I went to all public school from grade school through college. I went to SUNY Binghamton, State University of New York at Binghamton. And I grew up in, we kept kosher in my house, and my parents still do back home. And I grew up, we went to a conservative temple, and I know you weren't asking me purely on the religious front, but I'm just trying to paint a picture of, I grew up in a household where it was very secular, but also very respectful of tradition. And as I describe in my book, nothing was really off limits when it came to discussion about things. So at every holiday, whether it was Thanksgiving or Rosh Hashanah, it was like we would have tables of 40 people, and everybody was arguing about everything. We'd argue about abortion, we'd argue about taxes, we'd argue about Israel, whatever it might be. And then at the end, the women would come out and serve cake, serve dessert, and everyone just kind of put it aside. That was it. That's not to say we didn't have other family squabbles about personal things, but when it came to the political stuff especially, I think that, there's the old joke, if you've got 3 Jews at a table, you've got 4 opinions. And I think we really kind of exemplified that sort of thing. So I was never inherently offended when people would disagree with me. I always loved it, actually. I spent... my friends, even now, my 2 best friends, I'm 44 years old, my 2 best friends, one of them I met the first day in kindergarten. I remember meeting him, John, he comes from an Italian background. And my buddy Ari, who moved to town in 3rd grade, he comes from a Greek background. And, we knew we were sort of different in that our foods were different and our traditions were different, but they'd come to my house for Hanukkah, I'd go to John's house for Christmas, and we'd go to Ari's house and roast a lamb for Greek Easter. And it was that sort of thing that I think helped build I didn't realize it actually until I was really writing my book, but that sort of diverse in the right sense of the word diverse, that sort of diverse upbringing, I think led me to be someone that I care about ideas. I don't feel that I have to be right all the time. I like talking to people from different walks of life. And just quickly on what you said about your kids and telling you to watch the show and everything, I mean, I love hearing that because that's the only reason I started doing the show. You said, oh, well, everything was sort of getting dumber and more shallow on mainstream media. That's the only reason I started doing the show. I about 5 years ago, when I started doing the longer form interview show, the Rubin Report that people now know, it was just 5 years ago this month, actually, was my first long form interview with Sam Harris. And the only reason I did it was because I thought, what happened to that? What happened to watching things that don't make you feel stupider at the end, or don't insult you, or just end up watching 2 people insult each other? So I love the fact that, look, if it all ended for me tomorrow, if I had a little something to do with the birth of this new thing that is counteracting the mainstream madness and that has helped people of all ages, but I suppose particularly young people, explore ideas in a new way. If that's all I ever do on this earth, I think that's pretty decent.
It's a pretty big achievement. It really is. Let, let's move forward a little bit. Fast forward 5 years, you have a new book, which is called Don't Burn This Book. And Don't Burn This Book, the book actually came out, the title and the cover and the matches on the cover were set. That was all set up before people started burning down, buildings, city blocks. I think, I think there was a study that came out that just now that said 200 American cities have been subject to arson and looting and violence this summer. Was this prophecy? What is "Don't Burn This Book"? What did it originally mean before we all start saying, well, what Dave was saying was "Don't burn down our cities"?
Yeah, well, in retrospect, I should have said, don't burn down the store that's selling this book, or don't burn down the city that has the store that's selling this book. Right. Well, look, you know a lot about the publishing world, and yes, I was done writing this book in July of 2019. The book came out in April of 2020, just as the riots were happening, just as we were watching things burn down. I mean, the idea behind the title was I lay out what I think are, in most respects, very moderate, classically liberal positions. And I lay out I'm happy to discuss any of my positions on anything, but I lay out that framework as what I think is the best framework to have a society that is pluralistic and open and can help human flourishing. Now, I know we've had some interesting interactions on Twitter where you think the missing pieces are to the classical liberal ideology, and I think I addressed actually some of that in the book, and I'm sure we're going to get into that shortly. Yeah. But that's what I lay out in the book, and the reason I titled it "Don't Burn This Book" is because, look, I'm talking about free speech, I'm talking about free markets, I'm talking about all of the things that I think allow people as individuals to live the best life that they can, and yet those are very dangerous, let's say flammable ideas these days. And so it was a little tongue-in-cheek by calling it "Don't Burn This Book." But in essence, and even what happened when the book came out, I had these huge mobs that were coordinated on Reddit and all of these places that were trying to overwhelm Amazon with negative reviews and all of these things. And what they're doing, it's not because they read the book, it's just because they're sort of afraid of the ideas that I put forward. And in essence, that is a modern book burning. We're not in, thankfully, at the moment, we're not in 1930s Germany where we're going to have bonfires of books just yet. But in a modern sense, if you try to overwhelm a server or review a book terribly because you don't like it, that is a modern book burning. So in many ways, the people who hate me most are the ones that are actually proving the ideas that I put forth in the book.
Yeah, look, let's open up a little bit what's in the book. There's you said a few minutes ago that you see yourself as a classical liberal, and in fact that's kind of a theme in the book is describing classical liberalism and to a very large degree opposing it to what I think is basically a Marxist ideology, the what's called woke culture today. That's a sort of a euphemism for an updated Marxism that's looking to overthrow much of what it is that we've inherited, including the freedoms that we've inherited and a lot of other things. And in opposition to this, you position yourself in what you call a classical liberal. Right? So why don't you just say a few words about how you see that?
Yeah, well, look, in essence, classical liberalism, you believe in individual rights, meaning that everyone that is a legal member of any society, whether it's where you are in Israel or where I am in the United States, if you are a legal member of society, then you should be treated equally under the law, period. It doesn't matter what your gender is, what your sexuality is, what your, any immutable characteristic, it is irrelevant. You should be treated equally under the law. And then really beyond that, you want some version of laissez-faire economics, meaning you want the market to resolve most things. But at the same time, I would say that classical liberalism is different than, say, pure libertarianism, because most people, when I say that, the average person who's not a political wonk will say, oh, well, you just want libertarianism. And I don't mind being called a libertarian, actually, but the difference, I would say, is that a libertarian, you know this, I'm sure, you've been to many of the conferences that I've been to. If you sit around with a bunch of libertarians, you sit around with 10 libertarians and the conversation always devolves into should we have driver's licenses or all of these things that really we don't need to debate. I don't think we need to debate anymore. I like a lot of the ANCAP ideas. I like all of these things of how much could you really privatize in a society. But I view government sort of, I view a controlled small government as sort of a necessary evil. So I would say a classical liberal really is just sort of in essence, a realistic libertarian. But I would also say that in essence, the things that I've described, these have all become conservative values for sure. So I don't want to, I will drop some info on this podcast for you. I don't want to release the title of my new book yet. But I will tell you I'm working on a second book. And I would say in essence, all of the things that I'm defending right now, individual rights, limited government, these principles, the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights, these are all conservative values. So if someone was to say to me, well, Dave, you really sound like a conservative now. Well, yeah, I'm trying to conserve liberalism, and I think that's a good thing. And what I've seen that is really nice is that the conservative tent right now, or let's say the center-right tent, it is expanding. It really is expanding. So you can have, say, secular people that are even pro-choice, someone like Rudy Giuliani, who, let's not forget, 8 years ago, or a little more than 8 years ago, when he ran for president in that short run, they thought he was the #1 candidate at one point. Now, he was pro-choice as a Republican. Now, I'm not saying that Republicans all have to be pro-choice, but the fact that this guy can be a Trump supporter and lives a secular life and was the mayor of New York City and is obviously a Republican, and then you can have people like, say, Mike Huckabee or Mike Pence and everything in between, well, that's a pretty broad, wide tent of people saying, yeah, we've got some differences, but let's move forward in a sensible way. And on the left, what you have right now is just a purging of all of the free thinkers. Either you're woke or you're out. And of course, what they always forget is they're always trying to out-woke themselves. So at one point, if you have any flicker of individual thought left, you're going to say something, most likely accidentally, that's anti-woke. And guess what's going to happen? You're going to be embraced by all of those scary people on the right, and you're going to be kicked out by the people on the left. So that's really the prism that I sort of view the world through right now.
So that sounds like the kind of the classical liberalism, if I can say it. One of the things that I enjoy about reading this book is that it's not that even though you're certainly right to call yourself a classical liberal, but periodically there are all sorts of things that jump out that make somebody who's more conservative say, oh, I recognize this. There's actually a more conservative impulse, and I'll tell you the kind of thing I mean. I mean that when you're talking about liberty, you're careful to say, but there are other issues like the stability of the society, and if you want to be a practical person, if you want to be empirical and prudential about this, you don't just say, listen, we all have these God-given rights, and that's it, and so everybody has to give us these rights, and that's it. That can't be the end of the story, because as you say, if you can't make the system stable when there's nothing going on other than people fighting about, what rights do they have, how are you going to make the system stable? And you yourself repeatedly talk about the traditions that give stability to the kind of society that we have, which are, they're going to be different from place to place. Am I reading you correctly?
Well, you are, and I find this, I think what we're about to get into here, I think this is the most interesting thing we could possibly talk about right now, because what we are seeing with the left as they rip down monuments and we rename buildings and then we burn down buildings and we suddenly debate things, as my friend, and I think you're a friend as well, Douglas Murray talks about, we're debating things that we shouldn't be debating anymore. Suddenly everything is up for debate. Is freedom good? Is Western society good? And we're suddenly debating all of this again. And as we're watching what I would truly describe as a cancerous ideology infect the host, the only thing we have to fall back on, in essence, it's not just tradition, because I think you're right that tradition is important, but it is empirical truth. And this is the part where my liberal friends now are more frustrated with me, and my conservative friends have now embraced me more. That liberalism in and of itself, everything that I just laid out about limited government and individual rights and all of those things, that all sounds right, and when things are going well, it can kind of work on its own. But we don't live in a time when things are going well. We live in a time of chaos. And because of this chaos, you need something else to fall back on. So when the founders of the United States, when they said God-given rights, what they were saying was, all we're doing is creating a system that is going to protect your freedoms. We did not make you free. God made you free. Now, we can have all sorts of discussions about what the word God means and how it's different from in a Jewish perspective than, say, a Christian perspective or something else. But let's just say God, meaning just the unmoved mover, you are born free. We are creating a system to free you. And what's so brilliant about what they did, of course, was that at the same time, they also said, by the way, we're also going to make you free from religion. You can be religious if you want, but it won't be part of the state. This is sort of a really brilliant system that we've created. And again, because we live in this time of chaos, we seem to be debating whether we're going to keep it or not. But I would say the reason I find this so interesting is that the liberals, the last few good liberals, and there are not many of them, their major aversion to being called a conservative, or even just being seen in circles with people like you or Dennis Prager or Ben Shapiro or whatever, is because of the religious connotation that comes with conservatism. And I don't fear that. If anything, I respect it now. I'm not particularly religious myself. Actually, we've started doing Shabbat again here in my house. But I'm not someone that, I don't go to temple every week and pray and all of that stuff. And we'll see how my life continues to move forward. That's just fine. But I absolutely understand that the only thing that is going to stop this woke religion, that is going to stop this creeping Marxism, is something timeless, that is true and rooted in tradition, and you need that in a society. And one of the things that I'm very worried about right now is the fact that with all these corona lockdowns, people aren't going to church, they aren't going to temple, and all of these things, and that to further destroy that level of community is just going to make us that much more dependent on big tech and the online overlords. And I don't fear what I think most liberals fear about saying that there is a God and there are things outside of ourselves. I think a lot of liberals, the Enlightenment liberals, I don't want to throw any specific person under the bus, but the people that think it all started at the Enlightenment, that somehow, just a couple hundred years ago, everything that's good and logic and reason, all these things, they just appeared basically out of nowhere. Well, no, it came from the churning through of good and bad ideas for millennia before that. And that is not nothing. If it all came from our head, well then the guy who comes next year with new ideas should be ready to tear it all down. And I'm not someone that wants to tear it all down.
Right. And in fact, I kind of found myself taking a deep breath when I got to the part of your book where you actually explicitly say that enlightenment is not enough. And,
it's not enough.
It's not enough. And then by the next page, you're talking about the Bible. And what you're saying is people have been telling these stories and learning from them how to live for thousands of years. And that kind of is the software on which all of these new rights and freedoms ended up being built. So people have thrown away that software that was underlying all of it, and they just expect that it's going to continue. And here we are. Take a look. We've thrown it away, and now absolutely everything that comes from the past, as you said, is not just being reconsidered. It's literally being demolished. I believe that if the more radical elements in the streets in America, if they could, they would simply uproot everything and start from scratch, like start from
Well,
absolute zero.
Well, not only uproot everything, they would gladly do all of the things that they claim Trump would do that he never does. They would gladly imprison their political opposition. They would gladly use the power of the state to destroy people, or they believe that the state is God in essence, right? They have a God-shaped hole, and they think they can perfect a system that can rule all of us. But that is so deeply, profoundly dangerous. We are the problem in the system, we humans, right? This is sort of matrix level stuff for some people that don't want the biblical story. If you don't want the biblical version, I'll give you the Keanu Reeves version. We are the flaw in the system, meaning we are not perfect. So the idea that imperfect people can create a perfect system that can manage other imperfect people, you got a real bug in there that you got to deal with. You got a real virus in there. And by the way, of course, as you know, this is why socialism and communism always kills millions and millions of people, because you got to eliminate a lot of bad people to get to your utopia. I'll give you one other pop culture reference, because that is what the kids like, which is if you watch the Marvel movies, in Avengers, Thanos was the bad guy in the last two movies, and what did Thanos want? Well, Thanos saw a universe that had finite resources, and what he said is, all of you guys, you're just gonna run around and destroy everything, so I'm the good guy. And what am I gonna have to do as the good guy? And most bad guys think of themselves as the good guy. I'm gonna have to wipe out half the life in the universe. And that's what he did, and he did it thinking he was the good guy. And that's what's so dangerous about this Marxist movement, is they're going to, it's very easy to destroy things. It's very easy to tear down monuments. It's very easy, in effect, to remove the pictures of all the old white men at universities. It's easy to do that. To rebuild these institutions is very difficult. And I think for our liberal friends that are still trying to out-logic these guys, or just say, you see, you're wrong because of this, or you're wrong because of that, you're going to be destroyed in it. You're really going to be destroyed in it. And they're doing it just so that they don't have to be called conservative, or even worse, so that they don't have to be called Trump supporters. And I think that is just a flaw of the liberal mind. And it's why, as I said earlier, I think the future for all Western societies is a center-right future. Why has Israel gone that way? Why has most of Eastern Europe gone that way? The last UK elections have gone that way, the Australian elections. It's all gone sort of center-right, because when people are confronted with a force of absolute chaos, or the choice is law and order, some remembering of how things were, some sense of tradition, I think the sensible people are going to say, well, that's the way we're going to go.
Okay, Dave, I just want to pick up on the point you were just making on Donald Trump. I know that it is a very, very big question for an awful lot of viewers who care about your opinions. What's your position on the election? I mean, this is a really huge issue. So I hope you don't mind my asking directly. Are you actually endorsing Donald Trump for president this year?
Hazony, you've become a cracked interviewer only halfway through your first interview. I can't believe it. You're putting me under the gun over here. Let me first address the what I think is going to happen with the election, and then I'll directly answer your question about Trump. So as far as the election, one of the things that I've been saying over the last couple weeks particularly is, as we watch the craziness get ramped up, and we watch virtually all Democrat-run cities overrun with violence and defunding the police, and buildings burning and police stations burning and stores not opening and everything else. As we watch that, I think that if, let's say you take your people on the left that are always going to vote Democrat, and you take your people on the right that are always going to vote Republican, and then we have whatever that number is in the middle. And it's very hard to tell what that number is, because those people often don't show up in polls and everything else. We used to call them independents. But I think looking at things through the traditional prism of Democrat, Republican, Independent is starting to not make sense anymore, because I think Trump has just flipped the chess table, the chessboard, and the pieces are all over the place. But I think we have a huge amount of people. I think it truly might be as much as something like 30% of the American electorate that is not really either one of the sides anymore, and is really not sure where they're going to go. And that's the part of the American electorate that I'm really interested in talking to, of course. Now, I think that if you're going to look at what I just described, the average person watching the cities burn, and then maybe you have some sort of aversion to Trump. I know a lot of people like this, that they don't like the way he tweets, or that he's fighting with people, and they don't like, you know, the certain amount of the acerbic nature of Trump, or they find him too brash, or whatever it might be. But if the choice is destruction of our cities, or voting for a guy who clearly loves America, he's trying to keep the wheels on the thing, he believes in law and order, all of those things, but you just don't like some personality part of him, or maybe you don't even like all of the policies. But if your choice is that, destruction, or let's put it through a Jordan Peterson lens, if your choice is chaos or order, I think most people are going to choose order. So my guess is, and it's hard to be a predictor in normal times, but particularly between a pandemic and you know, race riots, it's really hard to be a predictor. I think Trump is going to win pretty handily. It's very easy for me to envision someone who voted for Hillary last time, who kind of begrudgingly voted for Hillary. They didn't love her. And this time they're going, you know what? The Democrats have completely lost their mind, because Biden is just the firewall. He's just the last stop before they really bring in the radicals, the AOCs and the Ilhan Omars and the rest of them. Everyone knows that. Biden doesn't stand for anything, and he's obviously got cognitive problems and everything else. So I could see a lot of people just saying, all right, well, I know what's coming on that side, so I'm going to vote for Trump. But it's hard to imagine. I mean, we can do an exercise here. If you were a Trump voter last time, what situation could get you to go, all right, I was a Trump voter last time, and now I'm going to vote for, in essence, the far left? It just doesn't make sense. So I think you're going to see a lot of the people who begrudgingly voted for Hillary move to Trump, and then I think you're going to see a lot of people in the middle vote for Trump. I think the bigger issue is that you can already see the media laying the groundwork for the Democrats to not accept the results of the election. I mean, they barely accepted the results of the last election, but you can really see them now talking about how Trump won't step down if he loses, and Bernie Sanders tweeting out this long thread about how Trump won't leave office, and all of these things. And that's a very, very dangerous game. You know, for the flaws of America, which there of course are flaws, we've always, in essence, had a safe and peaceful transition of power. The Democrats are really laying the work, and the media are laying the work. Now to directly answer your question, I see no situation at this point where I don't vote for Trump. I mean, look, do I have some issues with the way he speaks and the Twitter stuff and all that? Of course I do, and I think most people do, except it's really hard to criticize the guy who did the thing that no one thought they could do, right? So he broke the system by tweeting, by fighting with people, by never backing down, and basically by putting his foot on the gas all the way. And then all the critics who never accomplished any of those things, who maybe supported McCain or Romney, who lost, of course, they're the ones that are now saying, Trump, take your foot off the thing, be a little bit more like the guys who lost. Well, Trump can't do that. He knows he can't do that. So while I may have some issues with him, in terms of policy, in terms of what he's done and cutting regulation and giving power to the states, even in the midst of the pandemic, which I think is the right thing to do, and the absolutely miraculous stuff that's going on in your neck of the woods in the Middle East right now between this deal with Israel and the UAE. You know, before Trump, I thought we were all supposed to be for Middle East peace. Now, apparently, you're not supposed to be for Middle East peace because it has something to do with Trump. You know, it sounds like 4 or 5 other Gulf states might sign similar agreements with Israel, and that this has been going on really in the last 2 years. And it's like, well, everybody was for Middle East peace. Now we're just not so sure anymore. I think look, is Trump going to start more wars? Does anyone think he's starting more wars? No. He just announced in the last couple of days, we're going to bring more troops out of Iraq. We're going to bring more troops home from Afghanistan. Nobody even knows why we're in Afghanistan anymore, which is I think it's an 18-year war. It's the longest war in American history. So, and I will say one other thing. You may have seen my show where I talked about this. I did meet Trump, and I was at Mar-a-Lago with Trump Jr. and having dinner with my partner and with Trump Jr. and Kimberly Guilfoyle, his girlfriend, and we went up to the president after, and I found him to be extremely friendly, extremely open. We had about 5 minutes alone, just the two of us. It was in December, in the midst of impeachment, when everybody on MSNBC and everywhere else was saying he's freaking out, the walls are closing in, he's paranoid, he's scared. He had no tie on. He was relaxed and happy. And I said to him, "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. President." And he looked at me when I said that as if I could have just as easily said, "Yo, Don, what's up?" Like there really was no air of better than anybody or anything else. It's a weird thing. Look, he's orange. He has crazy hair. He talks kind of funny. It's a bizarre thing to wrap your head around. But I don't think he's evil. I think he loves most of the things that you and I and most of your listeners probably love. And he's trying to fight something that the traditional Republican would never win. Romney could never stand up to this wokeism. McCain could never stand up to this wokeism. Trump is mapping, whether he's imperfect or not, and he is imperfect, Trump is mapping a winning strategy for people on the right, because you have to fight the Democrats and you have to fight the media. And Trump is leading the fight on that thing, and I see no way around it. How about that for a button answer on a really long-winded way of talking?
Wait, so you're supporting Trump?
So as I said, the first sentence I said when you asked me, I see no way around not voting for Trump. Yeah. I'm not voting for Biden. I'm not voting for Biden. So, and I'm not going to vote third party. Last time, you're really trying to get me here.
No, I voted for. I actually don't want to get you. I just want to, for your position.
No, I'm voting for Trump. Okay. I'm voting for Trump. The only reason I would be even a little hesitant to say it so specifically like that is because I do think that my job as an interviewer is to be as impartial as possible. And what's become more difficult for me over the last year and a half or so, but particularly since the book came out, is that because I'm often doing this side of the interview now and people want to know what I think about things, I try to be as impartial when I'm interviewing somebody. So sometimes the more that all of my opinions are heard, I feel like that could color that. So I try to be somewhat careful, but that's just the nature of the beast that I'm involved in right now.
Yeah,
Biden is not going to stop the thing that I think is the biggest threat to Western society. I think Trump could stop it.
Well, that's pretty compelling. Sounds pretty compelling to me. All right, let's talk about let's talk a little bit about nationalism, if that's okay, because
sure.
I mean, I certainly see things kind of the way that you've laid them out. That there's really a small number of very big issues. One of them is obviously the fact that for the first time in its history, America really does seem to be poised on the edge of having an updated Marxism taking over many or even most, God forbid, of the institutions, the New York Times, Princeton University, the institutions that used to be the backbone of liberal culture in America. I mean, America's been a clearly liberal state, a country dominated by institutional hegemonic liberalism, at least since the 1960s. So you and I don't really remember a time when America wasn't clearly a liberal country, where liberal ideas were the mainstream. And now we're for the first time in our lives seeing a situation where the institutions that gave the signal, that explained what liberalism was, that taught it to people, those institutions are giving it up. Not only are they making conservatives illegitimate, that's been going on for a long time, but even if you're just a liberal who is open to having conservative voices, like an opinion editor at the New York Times or something, if you just want to keep the conservatives legitimate enough to be, part of the conversation, that's enough for you to be kicked out because you're not collaborating with this updated Marxism. So there's that issue. There's the rise of China, which is a huge issue, and then there's still the question of nationalism, the independent nation state. Do we want the countries that we live in to become sort of part of this this big internationalist blob, which, you know, that was and will continue to be a major question. I think those are the major questions on the table, and on all and on all of them, we even if you don't like Trump's personality, right, which I understand too, and I understand why people have problems with it, but on those issues, he has actually come out on the side that I think is, you know, intuitively makes sense. Now, you went into talking about nationalism some in your book, and I know that's a word that also scares a lot of people. What do you mean by nationalism, and what do you think is defensible about it? A lot of people think it's the opposite of liberalism. So, you know, how could you be a classical liberal and be a nationalist?
I know a lot of people tell me that when I quote this book. It's called The Virtue of Nationalism. You might know the author. And I tweet it at people every now and again, and they say, what kind of liberal could be for nationalism? But before we get to that, I just want to quickly address this thing about the liberals sort of offering now no cover for the conservatives, just very briefly, because you touched on that. And I think the New York Times is such a perfect example of this. All of us have seen over the last decade, let's say, and for people that are older than me, a lot of right-leaning people say, oh, Dave, you're only waking up to it now, but this has been going on for decades and decades. But if you've been tracking sort of the New York Times over the last 10 years, but particularly the last 5 years, as social justice infected the entire thing, you're right. They went from, oh, okay, we can have a couple conservatives around and treat their ideas. It may not be the main thrust of what our newspaper is, but we'll keep the Bret Stephens around. We'll keep some more conservative-leaning people around because they at least deserve to be entertained. These ideas deserve to be entertained in what is supposed to be the paper of record. I think you can point to a lot of instances, and without patting myself on the back, I was involved in a lot of them, where the New York Times went completely overboard in how they were going to destroy people. So you may remember very briefly that article that they did on the intellectual dark web that Barry Weiss wrote a couple of years ago. And in essence, she was talking about this group of people online who were talking about, as you said earlier, politics and philosophy and all these things in long-form conversation in a very mature, honest way. And she referenced me and Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris and Ben Shapiro and a bunch of other people. But her criticism was that we also talk to people on the right. In this, she referenced Alex Jones. I've never had Alex Jones on my show, but Joe Rogan has had him on his, and Mike Cernovich, who I have had on, and Stefan Molyneux, and a few other people. And I'm not defending every interview I've done or every question I've asked, but her point, she wrote a line that I knew was going to be the line that years later I would look back to. She said you'd have to be stupid or cynical to be talking to these people. And I called her the next day and I said, Barry, you know, you really threw, in essence, she was throwing me and Rogan under the bus because we're the interviewers out of the group. And I said, you know, you're really going to regret that line because when they come for you, it's not going to be the scary right-wingers coming for you. It's going to be the left. And that's, by the way, something that I once said privately to Bill Maher a couple of years ago as well. And I think it's been proven correct. Why did Barry Weiss leave the New York Times? It wasn't because of the right-wingers that hate her. It was because of her own home. The purely liberal, secular home of the New York Times decided to destroy the liberals. And I just think that that's a fascinating thing that we could talk about for hours and hours. But to get to the nationalism point, I think there's a very simple way to frame this, and I think you're probably the best when it comes to this. But you either believe in a top-down worldview or a bottom-up worldview. What I believe is that every nation, I believe nations should exist to protect laws and citizens and protect cultures and traditions and all of those things. And you should do the best you can to fight for the things that you believe in the nation that you live in, right? And every nation has a right to set their borders and all of those things. You either believe now, which many people seem to believe, that there should be some sort of global government that somehow the UN and these giant, it's hard to even tell what it is anymore, giant corporations or wealthy people or whatever, should somehow control all of us and we should all sort of live the same and they will get the order basically from central planning, and that's how we're all going to live. Or you believe that the best way to build a functioning society is that you'd have smaller, independent nations where the people then have more say in the governments that they elect, and then the governments can then decide who they want to play with, in essence, who they want to build alliances with. And that each government and each country will remain separate, will have its certain traditions, will have its certain beliefs. And these differences actually will make us stronger. And I think the country you're in is probably the best example of this. In Israel, you are in a place that is in an extremely rough neighborhood where an ethnic minority has returned to its eternal homeland after thousands of years. It's a miraculous story that basically sounds like fiction, and yet it is real. It is real in Israel, and in essence, Israel then protects its borders and figures out who to be friendly with. And we're, as just to reference the UAE thing, I mean, now those friendships are flourishing right now. And that will be the best way to retain a national character, by deciding what's good for you first. And for people that are watching this that don't really care about politics, I mean, the simplest way you could describe it is, in your own home, do you think that someone else should decide who you should invite into your home, what is allowed to be said in your home, or what rules should be in your house? Or do you think you and your family should decide those things? And then you can decide whether you want to be friends with the neighbors, or you just don't want to associate with them, or whoever else. And I think when you take things down to that micro level, it's very obvious that nationalism, meaning I want to live in a society that has borders, that hopefully protects some of the ideals that I believe in, and I will have some influence over that. That's nationalism in its best sense. And I think where you get criticized is people just have the wrong definition of nationalism. So they think that somehow nationalism is somehow associated with some sort of automatic, intrinsic, religious, ethnic superiority. And I simply just don't see it that way.
Well, the strange thing is that if you go back, I don't know, 20 years, 30 years, you go back 20 or 30 years, Israel was the main country in the world that was being criticized in this way. Israel is, it's exactly what you say it is. It's a classic nation state. It's the state of the Jewish people. We do our very best. We give equal rights to non-Jewish minorities. But the reason that the country exists is in order to allow there to be one place in the world where Jews can determine their own fate rather than it being decided by others. That's the reason that the country exists. And a generation ago, and we can actually put a date on it. In 1975, the United Nations, which had originally established Israel, or voted to establish Israel, in 1975 they said, we take it back, and they passed a resolution that said Zionism is racism. And this was this kind of shocking thing. What is it about being Jewish and wanting self-determination for your people that makes us a racist country? But of course, we listened to a whole generation, 2 generations of these attempts to delegitimize Israel, which were actually being led by the propagandists of the Soviet Union. And now it's all these years later, and it's not just Israel anymore. Israel was supposed to be a racist country because it was an independent nation state. But today, the same people who were willing to say that Israel was racist, that there's a new version of them, they say that America is racist. In fact, America, Italy, the UK for wanting to be independent for Europe, the Eastern European countries, India, Brazil, you can just go on and on. Every country that wants its independence and to assert its own tradition is today being called racist, authoritarian, fascist. They're all illegitimate now. And so I feel like we've watched this disease that began with Israel has no right to exist. Israel is not a legitimate country. And now we're watching the same thing with regard to America. That's what people on the far left, that's what they're saying. They're saying that America was never a legitimate country. That was,
and that, by the way, that right there is one of the reasons that, in many cases, the absurdly tiny size of Israel is not the most comfortable place to be in, because it's hard to defend land that's so absolutely tiny. But I think in some respect, having that national identity tied to tradition and religion in this case, gives an ethos that I sense will make it a little easier for Israel to survive this craziness than a lot of other countries. The United States has a truly unique problem right now, because as this Marxism rampages through everything, what once was the strength of the United States, give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, let's bring in all of these people, and you can bring your foods and your tradition and your language and all of these things, and then as long as you fit into the tapestry, the melting pot of America, you will make a better life for yourself. And when I go to college campuses, that's what I always say to these kids. I say, I want you to think for one moment about your grandparents. Do you have it better or worse? And almost nobody in an American context has it worse than their grandparents. It doesn't matter what the color of their skin is, or what their religion or ethnic identity or anything else is. But the reason that the United States has a particularly unique problem is that our openness, our true plurality, the true cause of America, that it doesn't matter where you're from, but you will fit into the fabric of America, that is what's under attack. That's different than other countries. That was not the cause of the United Kingdom. That was not the cause of Australia or other countries. It's very much the cause of the United States. It's the purpose that the United States exists, is to be open and spread freedom. And that's why even right now, for all of the people that hate Donald Trump, nobody's leaving, and everybody still wants to come. They can tell you the place is run by Hitler, and yet an awful lot of people still want to come here.
Well, originally America was an experiment in federalism, right? I mean, what you're describing is right, but there is this other side to it, which you talk about in your book, that the original American Constitution, designed by George Washington and his Federalists, that Constitution allowed the different states to have very, very different kind of traditions and governing systems. I think probably most striking for modern people is to realize that the New England states had established churches that were supported by the state at the time of independence, and those lasted a few generations. Now, this actually raises a question in your book. You say this, I think, crucial thing, where you argue, look, the beauty of federalism, and this is a lot like the beauty of nationalism, is that if you really don't like the way that a particular country is run, then a nationalist will say, well, that's what's good about having many different independent nations, is that you have alternatives.
Exactly.
And under a federalist system, obviously it can't be, there has to be some kind of common national purpose and law uniting everything. But still, the idea of federalism was the federal government doesn't have to decide everything. There can be different models in the different states, and those models, each one is kind of an experiment. And if you don't like the experiment in the state that you're living in, then you could move to a different state. That's right out of your book. And
well, federalism is a micro version of nationalism. When people talk about states' rights, I think they're in essence usually making the same argument that you're making about nationalism. States' rights, your state can decide for itself, and you should vote for a mayor of your city, and then in a larger sense, a governor of your state that is in line with your beliefs. And look, I'm in California right now. Does the California state legislator, or my governor Gavin Newsom, or my mayor Eric Garcetti, all far lefties, are they congruent with any of my beliefs or anything we've talked about here? Absolutely not. But I'm going to fight, at least for now, to hopefully bring some of these ideas back into Californian politics. And I do sense that there is a strong sort of right-leaning resurgence happening in Los Angeles, believe it or not. I don't know that we're going to see it in the next election, but I do sense people are watching all of the bad policies of the lefties and going, oh, maybe we should try something else. The lefties have been running everything here for so long. Our taxes are high, our education's horrible, the pollution, the bad roads, et cetera, the homelessness, and the drug use. So federalism is just the smaller version of nationalism. And that, again, it's a beautiful thing, because if you don't like what's happening in Israel, hopefully, well, let's say there was only one world government. In essence, you could move to another country perhaps, but it would be virtually the same there, because one world government would be telling you exactly the same thing that they're telling you in Israel. But by having small independent nations, if one day you really absolutely hated what was going on in Israel and you could legally get into another country, well then it would be different in that other country, and maybe the things that you care about would be more respected there, or your ability to affect the system would be greater. That's a beautiful thing. So I think, I don't know of, and maybe you can share it with me, but I think in essence, federalism in the truest sense and nationalism in the truest sense are very, very similar. I don't really see a major difference there, other than we're talking about, in one essence, states within a system, and in the other essence, we're talking about nation states.
Historically what's happened is that it seems to me that the United States has just moved away from federalism. At this point, any kind of an issue that has to do with rights. Now, I understand why this happened historically, because because there really was an unsolved, endless problem of how can you just get a decent life for black people in America, and that problem pushed the United States in the direction of effectively giving up on a lot of its federalism. So at this point, anytime an issue seems like it's really important, anytime something touches on rights, which is just about everything, then the Supreme Court decides, and it doesn't decide, for one state or another, it decides for everybody. And I think that's part of what's so difficult now, is that this new updated Marxism, it could care less about federalism. They've got a view about rights, and they're going to use those rights to destroy whatever they need to in order to get the people they consider to be oppressed to be the people in charge. That's their view. That's what they're going to do. They could care less about federalism. But I think that liberals have an issue that they need to address at this point, whether we've talked a bit about this, looking for a coalition between liberals and conservatives, basically an anti-Marxist coalition between anti-Marxist liberals and conservatives who are willing to fight. And I believe that there's no choice. That's the way we've got to go. But I think people who are on the conservative side will definitely ask, look, are these liberals that are going to be our allies, are they willing to go back to some kind of federalism where states that are more conservative will have a public life that's more conservative, even if that's kind of like, upsetting to liberals? I don't know, so they'll say about abortion or teaching Bible in the school system. I mean, there's endless issues. And the question is there really room in the alliance for liberals to tolerate, a conservative state within the United States?
Listen, if I was a conservative cut from that cloth, it's a perfectly legitimate question to ask, and it would be something I was worried about, right? So I referenced earlier how, let's say, Rudy Giuliani is on the more liberal side of the conservative tent in that he's pro-choice. He had officiated gay marriages even before gay marriage was passed, but he absolutely is a conservative, and he certainly is a member of the Republican Party, and he spoke before Trump in 2016. So there's no doubt that this guy is a Republican. But does the traditional conservative have to worry, we're going to take all of these ideological refugees from the mess of Marxism, they're going to come in here because we're going to offer them some cover because we care about free speech and all of this stuff. Right. And are they going to then start the disintegration within our side? I think that's a totally legitimate question, and I would really be worried about it. And I am worried about it right now, because look at it this way. When you see all of these people now supposedly moving from California, they can't take it anymore, they're moving from California to Texas. Well, often we know they export from California and then import it into the red states all of these blue ideas and these bad ideas, and then they turn states blue. So, if I was the average Texan conservative, I would be pretty worried when, say, Joe Rogan, I like Joe, but when Joe Rogan, who is a Bernie supporter, he's fleeing California to set up shop in Texas, right. And you're excited because it's kind of cool that Joe Rogan lives there, but it's like, he's gotten the big ideas wrong, and you have to be worried about that. That's not a shot at Joe Rogan personally, but that's just a reality, I think. So I think it's a perfectly legitimate question. I don't know what the answer is. You mentioned Roe v. Wade as one good example of this. Most liberals who, I do find that most liberals who still say that they're liberal, but they're not leftists, but they don't want to be called conservatives, abortion seems to be the one. It's abortion and religion are the real two that keep them from saying I'm fully a conservative, let's say. Like on Roe v. Wade, most of them would never agree that you could kick it back to the states. They would say, no, Roe v. Wade is the law of the land, that's it. They wouldn't, so to directly answer your question about federalism, they wouldn't care about federalism in that one. They would just say, no, abortion, it's the law, that's it. So this is where, look, it's a great space to have conversation. It really is a great space, because that's what conservatives are going to have to grapple with in the future. If we're going to let these people in to make our tent bigger, how do we make sure that the excesses of liberalism, which it's hard for me to admit that they exist, but they do exist, how do you make sure that the excesses of liberalism aren't now imported into our system? And I don't know that there's a great answer for that. I actually don't.
I want to give you just a chance, if you have something that you want to say sort of on the more hopeful side, because we've spent most of this program talking about how tough things are, and that's reasonable because we are in a tight spot. But is there something that gives you hope?
Well, I would say more than anything else, I consider myself a world-weary optimist. I don't know that I could do this for a living and survive and wake up each morning feeling okay with life if I wasn't an optimist at some level, meaning that these issues that we've talked about, that hopefully, even if one person that listens to this gets sparked with something that then can flourish in their life, that's enough. And then hopefully that's how you turn things around, which is so consistent with what we've talked about here, because I believe things are bottom up first. So you want people to come to these conclusions themselves. You don't want to force these conclusions on people. And at the same time, I'm world weary because I think perhaps more than anything else, I'm a realist. I see the world as it is, not as I want it to be. I want the world to be a certain way, but I know it's going to take work to get there, and you're going to have to build all sorts of interesting and odd and sometimes very uncomfortable alliances all along the way. But what's very cool for me is that all I did about 5 years ago was start saying what I think and start talking to interesting people. And through that, some guy who I had never heard of, some academic who had worked for Bibi Netanyahu in Israel, suddenly his 11-year-old is saying, you got to check out this, Dad. And then here we are doing this. That is such a cool, I really mean it. It's such a cool, incredible thing that is happening in the world right now. And people are waking up. They're waking up all over the place. You may not see it in polls. You may not see it through mainstream media. But I think good people are waking up, and they're realizing that, Jordan Peterson used to talk about this when we were on tour, that you have no idea what your power is. That, way back when, if you lived in a village and you had an idea, well, maybe you could get it to a couple other villagers, and there was a chance maybe it could get to the big city or something like that. And then time changes, and then suddenly, you can write a letter, you can make a telephone call, now there's cable news, now there's the internet. Well, now you could be just some kid somewhere sitting there playing video games and suddenly have some thought that sparks in your head, and you can tweet it out, and it might get seen by somebody with a huge following who shares it, and then suddenly the world knows what your idea is. That is incredible. That is absolutely incredible. And that's what enthuses me. That's what keeps me going. That we can do this, but it ain't going to be easy. And if it was easy, everyone would do it. So we've got our work cut out for ourselves.
Dave Rubin, thank you so much for joining us on NatConTalk. Catch you next time. Thank you for joining us for another episode of NatConTalk. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss us next time.